All right. Good morning, everybody. Let's open up to Judges, the book of Judges, Old Testament book of Judges. If you need a Bible, please raise your hand and then we will get one to you. And once you get that book, or the Bible, you can open up to Judges chapter 1. And we are starting a new series this morning. We've not been in a book since back in October when we finished up and then went into some Psalms and then went into our Christmas messages. And the first couple of weeks of January, we've been doing some different things. So now we're starting Judges, and this is continuing our study, our series that we were doing prior to the holidays. We had been through Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus, Numbers and Deuteronomy. We went through Joshua, and now we are into Judges. And this really continues the story, the saga of the children of Israel, who went from being slaves in Egypt to getting their own homeland and the process of all of that. Exodus, the book of Exodus, is about God taking his people out of Egypt. Then beginning in Leviticus, on into Numbers, Deuteronomy, and it becomes then God taking Egypt out of his people. They had spent so much time in Egypt as slaves that they were living like them. They were idolatrous and they would fall in and out of sin. And so then God sets about getting Egypt and that mindset out of them. And then as we got into the book of Joshua, that was the story of them going into the land that God had promised them. And Judges is more of that story, more of that that portion of the story where they're going into the promised land and trying to set up their new life there and their home there. But really what it is more so, Judges, is about, it's the result of the people not living by faith. It's going to be the story, 21 chapters of what it looks like to not live by faith. You will see the people over and over again. They're going to go through this cycle. The cycle is obedience to God. We'll start out with obedience today. But by the time we're done with Judges chapter 1, we will see disobedience and we will see the result of that. And so it's this cycle of obedience to the Lord, then disobedience, then God disciplining them. They repent and come back to obedience. And then they will start again with their disobedience, and then discipline, and then repentance, and returning to God, and then it's back to obedience, and it goes over and over and over again. But as you can see from the artwork on the screen, we will see the faithlessness of man over and over again. And that can become disheartening, discouraging. But what we will see against that backdrop of the faithlessness of man is that we will see the faithfulness of God shine through so strongly, so prominently, because we will see that mankind fails over and over again, and God continues to love, continues to discipline and lead and change his people over and over and over again. But we see what happens when people do not live, when we as his people do not live by faith, or just a partial faith, as we will see today. So Judges chapter 1, I have it broken up into two main divisions. Now, those of you that take notes, take note of this. Normally, I will at the very beginning put up the main divisions. You're going to get the first one here. That's the first main division, continuing by faith. That's the first main division in verses 1 through 20. And we will have a couple of subpoints under that as we go through our story. The second main division you will get, and when we get there, it'll go up on the screen. But in case you want it right now because you're used to doing your notes a specific way, the second main division begins at verse 21, goes down to verse 36, and it is called compromise. And again, I will get that on the screen for you when we get there. But because of the way that this is set up today, I decided to go with something a little bit different. And so this is where we're at. So we see the people, the children of Israel, they're starting out in the book of Judges here, continuing by faith. They start out very well. But keep in mind, that how you start is not as important as how you finish. You may start well, but if you do not finish well, that's no good. Those of you that run cross country or track, you can come off of that starting line or off the blocks too fast. You didn't save anything for the end. And you got nothing left for the end, you get passed up, that's no good. But you can start out bad, but perhaps still catch up or still do well. So finishing well, that's the main goal. Now starting well, that's also good, that's important. We want to start as well as we can. But starting well is not as important as finishing well. And so they start out well. We'll see how this all ends. Now, it begins here in verses 1 through 20, and in fact, verses 1 and 2, here's the first of our subpoints for the note takers. Under that first main division, continuing by faith, is seeking the Lord. So they start out well. Let's read it. Verse 1. Now, after the death of Joshua, it came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, who shall be first to go up for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Indeed, I have delivered the land into his hand. Now, and if you were here for Joshua, you already know that Joshua died prior to Judges chapter 1. Joshua was already dead. So this is transitioning us. And really chapter 1, chapter 2, and a portion of chapter 3 of Judges is going to transition us from Joshua into the book of Judges. Okay? But here we're told once again that after Joshua died. Now we do not know how long after Joshua died this was, but sometime after that, it came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord. This is seeking the Lord. This wonderful, we're going to find all kinds of wonderful lessons, as we always do when we study the Bible. We're going to find some wonderful lessons. And the first of those wonderful lessons happens immediately in verse 1, and it is this, that you do not need a leader in order to seek the Lord. It's extremely important, because there are many of us who only seek the Lord so far as our leader seeks the Lord. We might be living off of someone else's faith. It might be that you read your Bible or pray, or listen to Christian music because mom and dad say that's what we do. And when they're out of the picture, you may not do that on your own. So what we want to do is get to the place where our faith is developed so that we're seeking the Lord on our own, whether the leader is there or not. Important lesson here, and I'll point it out again at the end of our time together, but we do not need a leader in order to seek the Lord. Each of us should be in the habit of seeking the Lord. So they do not have a leader. Why is that? Because Joshua died. Well, why didn't Joshua choose another leader? Well, if you remember, Moses used to be the leader. Then there was a point where God spoke to Moses and said, I want Joshua to take over for you. He's going to be the next leader. Well, there's no record of God ever doing that with Joshua. Some people might say, well, Joshua should have trained somebody else. He should have had somebody else picked. But he was chosen by God. There's no record of God choosing somebody to take over after Joshua. So we do not know all, what exactly was God's plan. Well, we're seeing the results of all of that right here. But as far as we know, there was not another leader chosen. Ultimately, God wanted to be their leader. He wanted a theocracy. That's where God rules. God makes the decisions. But we will see here that the people, they fail at that. That doesn't work for them, not because God was doing something wrong, but because the people were unfaithful. But we'll get to that as we continue on through the book. But Joshua is dead. The children of Israel ask the Lord. This is a really good start, asking the Lord. So if your leader is not seeking the Lord, you need to seek the Lord. Okay? And if you have a leader that doesn't seek the Lord, then guess what? It's time to seek another leader. You want a leader that's going to seek the Lord. Okay? But even if he or she is not doing that, you need to do it. You can do it. You have the opportunity to do that. Well, here's what they ask in verse 1. They ask, Who shall be first to go up for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? So they're asking, who's going to be first? Who's going to take the lead? They're wondering, we need some leadership. Where's the leadership? That's a great question. Who's going to lead? Now, I like here, and there's nothing recorded telling us that the people were fighting over that leadership position. My assumption, and it is just an assumption because it doesn't say, but after working with people, I'm a pastor. I've been pastor for a lot of years. So what I do, in a sense, my business, it's not a business, it's a ministry, but just you'll understand, my business is people. Like I work with people. And I've been working with volunteers all of these years, and I've been working with students all of these years, and church groups and church people and just churches in general. And when it comes to leadership, you usually have three different kinds of people. You have the people who say, no way, there's no way I'm leading. No, that's not me. Then you'll have some people who say, you'll have the larger group saying, no way I'm leading. Then you'll have a smaller group saying, well, I'll do it if nobody else wants to do it. And then it's also not unusual to have a very small group, a third group of people who say, I'll do it. I'm the best leader. I should be the leader. And you'll have usually, the people who don't want to lead, they're like taking a step back when they're looking for volunteers. I don't want to do anything. I just want to float, man. I just want to cruise. And then you'll have some that'll say, well, I guess if nobody else is going to do it, I guess I'll do it. That's usually where I fall. I'm always looking like, I always want somebody else to be the leader. Please, somebody else lead. And oftentimes God's like, no, you're going to do it. All right, here we go. And then again, usually there's a smaller group of people who are like, I'll be the leader, nobody else is as good as me or whatever. Well, here I like that it doesn't seem to us that any of these people are fighting for leadership. And they do the right thing. Let's stop and let's seek the Lord. Who's going to go up? Who's going to follow us? Who's going to be first? Who's going to take the lead? Lord, who do you want to lead? And the Lord said, now I think this is wonderful. This is incredible. The people asked. That's called prayer. They prayed to God. And then in verse 2, God answered. That's the way it works. We pray, God answers. Now, the challenge for you and I, prayer is one of those areas of the Christian life that all of us, we all fall, we all fail, we all fall short, and we go, yeah, you know what, I don't pray enough. That is because we become discouraged, because we pray in verse 1, and God doesn't answer us in verse 2. And we go, well, in the Bible, and Judges chapter 1, the people prayed, and God answered in verse 2. But we do not know how much time transpired between verses 1 and 2. Did they pray and God just immediately answered them? Did they pray for several days? Did they pray for several weeks? Did they pray for a month? Did they pray for a year? We do not know. It doesn't say. That's one of the challenges of reading these stories or reading the Bible, is there are times where we're not sure, like how much time transpired in between there. It makes it seem like God just immediately answered them, and maybe he did. But maybe he didn't. It's not our job to figure out how much time is in between verses 1 and 2. That's not our job. Our job is simply verse 1. I just need to pray. And then I need to just trust the Lord. Wait for him. He'll answer. That's his job. You don't have to worry about him answering. That's his responsibility. He'll do that. Your job and my job is just to pray. It's just to trust God through prayer. That's our responsibility. Now, what does he say in verse 2 when he answers? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Now, what did they ask? Who shall be first to go up? The Lord answered, Judah shall go up. Now, Judah, in just a moment in verse 3, is going to talk to his brother Simeon. You need to keep this in mind, that as we're talking about Judah and Simeon, and later on the tribe of Dan and the tribe of Manasseh and Joseph and all these different people, you need to understand that Judah, the man, the original man, is no longer around. Simeon, when they mention Simeon, no longer around. Those guys died a long time ago. You go, so why are they talking about dead people? They're not. They're talking about their families. This is the family or the tribe of Judah. They're talking about the family or the tribe of Simeon. It would be like saying, Chris's, after I die, there's Chris's family. Well, Chris is gone. Chris is in heaven. So, this isn't his family anymore. He's gone. No, but it's still, they're represented by that. So these people that were part of these, they were part of the family of Judah. They were part of the family of Simeon. Keep that in mind. These are families or tribes, okay? Tribes of people. So God answers and says, Judah. Judah's going to be the tribe to go up first. They're going to lead the way. And then he says in verse 2, why? Why did he pick Judah? Well, you could say, well, Judah was the strongest, or, Jesus is going to come from the tribe of Judah. There's lots of different things that we could come up with, but to be honest, we don't know why God chose Judah. We can come up with these are some good qualities that Judah had, but we don't know. But here's what we do know. Because Judah had been chosen by God to prosper, to be successful. That's what it says in verse 2. Indeed, I have delivered the land into his hand. Well, God, why didn't you choose the tribe of Dan? Because they're not going to be successful. I'm not going to deliver the land into their hand. I'm giving it to Judah. Well, why didn't you, choose the tribe of Manasseh? Because I'm not giving the land to them. I'm giving it to Judah. Well, why didn't you choose, this tribe or that tribe? You had 12 tribes. Why didn't you, 12 and a half tribes? Why didn't you choose, somebody else? Because I'm giving the land to Judah. So if I'm giving the land to Judah, that means that they're going to lead. So he's chosen them to lead, and he's chosen them to lead the way into the land and to be successful. So seeking the Lord ends in an answer. That's what prayer, you pray and then God answers. And he might answer today, or maybe it's next week or next month or next year. God knows. He knows when to answer. We just need to be consistent and faithful to pray and trust him. Okay? So he answers here in verse 2. Now, here's what happens in verse 3. So Judah said to Simeon, his brother. Keep in mind, we're talking about groups of people, not an individual. Groups of people. So whatever leaders there were from Judah, they went to the leaders of Simeon. And here's what they said in verse 3. Come up with me to my allotted territory. Come to me to the territory that I've been given, that we may fight against the Canaanites, and I will likewise go with you to your allotted territory. And Simeon went with him. Now, as I was preparing, I was checking into other Bible teachers, and Bible teachers have lots of different opinions on this. The two most common are that Judah made a mistake by asking Simeon to come fight with me. They point out that God called Judah to go. Judah should have just went alone. I do not think that. I would disagree with them. I would say, no, this is a good thing that Judah and Simeon are serving together. I'll tell you why in just a moment, but look again at verse 1. What was the question that they asked? Who shall be first? Who's going to lead? Not who's going alone, who's going to go save the day for everybody, just who's leading. God, who do you want to lead? Who do you want to go first? So Judah's going first, and I love this in verse 3 that they reach out to Simeon, this other tribe. It's their family members essentially. So Judah said to Simeon his brother, come up with me. In other words, let's serve together. Now, who are they serving? They're serving God together. They're being obedient to God together. But they're also serving the rest of the tribes, all the rest of the people. And there were millions of people that were part of the children of God at this time. And so this tribe, Judah, says, hey, let's, you come with me, Simeon, and we'll serve together. We'll serve God in obedience and go take the land, but we'll also serve the people. We'll lead the way for them. So I like it. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, we won't go there because there's a lot there, but it's a beautiful passage, beautiful chapter, and it's Paul describing how the people of God, the church, called the church, how we all have different parts to play. Now, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I've been a pastor for a lot of years, and I've worked with church staff, people who work that are part of the church staff, but the main part of the work that I do has always been with volunteers. Volunteers are extremely valuable. There are some things that I can do fairly well. I said things. One or two. The rest of the things I do not do very well. We just finished listening to Rylan and Matt and Joe. They led us in worship. I'm not a worship leader. I'm not a musician. I'm not a singer. You do not want me leading worship. So we have these volunteers, wonderful volunteers. They come up and they lead, and they do a wonderful job at it. We've got leaders in here, adult leaders that are in here, and they all have qualities. It's almost like you're going to be so angry at me, but what's the Assemble? What's the superhero movie like? Avengers, right? Is that what it is? Avengers Assemble. Do they say that? Yeah. You guys are like, what are the Avengers? Like you never even heard of it. You guys don't watch movies. You're like, nah, we're Christian. We don't watch those movies. Maybe that's it. Maybe you're like, oh, I don't know what's in those movies. Do you? Okay. If Joaquin watches them, then they're safe. No, I don't know that. I don't ever watch those movies. And my own kids, they get mad at me because I don't understand what's going on in the Avengers movie. And it's like, what? Who's this big dude with all these rings? Or what is? Where did this guy come? I'm lost. Anyhow, when we bring the leaders together, it's like the Avengers assembly. Everybody's got special abilities. And there are things that I can do that some of the other leaders cannot do, but there are things that they can do that I cannot do. But we get together, God brings us together, and that's what 1 Corinthians chapter 12 is describing. This church, man, where everybody has a part to play, and it's a good thing. It's a beautiful thing. Well, here, Judah and Simeon, they partner up, and I love it. And they say, hey, Judah says, come with me. He invites. Judah is the stronger tribe and says, hey, come with us. Let's work together. So at the end of verse 3, Simeon went with him. Then Judah in verse 4 went up, and the Lord delivered the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hand, and they killed 10,000 men at Bezek. Now, in case you're going to go berserk over Bezek, hold on for just a minute. Let me explain some things, but I'll start in verse 4. The Lord delivered the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Now, just so you know, it's not that big of a deal, but just so you know, you don't get confused. In this land that they're going into, there were lots of different people. There were the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hittites and the Hivites and the Gibeonites, lots of different people groups. These were all different tribes who really would war with one another before the children of Israel came in. But then they begin to unite to try and fight against Israel. But anyhow, you have these different groups. Now, over time, all of those different people groups, the Hivites and the Gibeonites and the Perizzites and the Termites and all of them, they all get this blanket name of the Canaanites. Now, the Canaanites were one of the people groups, but after a while, over time, they all get blanketed under the name Canaanites. Okay, so it says here, then Judah went up, and the Lord delivered the Canaanites, and it does mention one of the other people groups, Perizzites, into their hand. And Judah and Simeon, these two tribes, got together, and they killed 10,000 men at Bezek. Now, as I said a moment ago, before you go berserk over Bezek, and the men, how could God do this? And that's an objection that a lot of people have to the Bible. They go, well, in the Old Testament, God was so bloody and he's always killing people and, all of these innocent people. So we have this view like, that's like, people, that were living in the land of Canaan and they're innocent and they're just minding their own business. And then God, he's so vicious and he sends his people into the land and kills all of these innocent people. Well, that is because we oftentimes do not know, we don't understand the background. Now, you can fact check me. You can go check this yourself. You go do a study on, and you don't even have to use the Bible. Go use outside sources and find out what the Canaanites, these people that lived in the land, find out what they were like. Find out what they were like. I'll give you two of the most extreme examples. Give you two of the most extreme examples. One, the people in the land of Canaan, they worshipped other gods, idols. Okay, that's their prerogative, like Bobby Brown. They want to do that, they could do that. But part of that worship included burning their children to death. Not all of their children. Certain times, for certain reasons, they would kill their kids. Put them on they would heat up a statue, the bronze arms, lay their kids on there and burn them to death. Sound innocent? Absolutely not. One of the other things that was part of their worship was sex. And it was every form. Adults, genders, kids, animals, nothing was off limits. You don't believe me? Go check that yourself. The problem is we come to this and all we read is, oh man, they killed 10,000 men. And we're thinking like, oh, this is, man, that's so sad. That's like the Brady's or the Partridge Family or something, or like Leave It to Beaver. Like these are all innocent people. No, they were not. You'll find out here when we start to read about Adonai-Bezek. We'll get a little glimpse as to what these people were like. But they have this first victory as they're serving together, and they're able to kill 10,000 men at Bezek. Now it says in verse 5, they found Adonai-Bezek. That name Adonai-Bezek, it means Lord of Bezek. That was probably not his name. He may have made that his name, but it really was his title. They found Adonai-Bezek, he's the ruler, in Bezek. He was there, and fought against him. And they defeated the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Then Adonai-Bezek fled, and they pursued him and caught him and cut off his thumbs and his big toes. Now, something you need to know about the book of Judges. It is rated R. Rated R for violence. It's a wild book. Some gnarly things that happen in here. People getting spikes through their head, tent spikes through their head, all sorts of things. This is the first, and this is just a little glimpse. Now, let's talk about this for a moment. They caught him and cut off his thumbs and his big toes. Why didn't they just kill him? What's that all about? Well, we'll find out why that happened to him, but the first thing that we want to note is the reason that people would do that, and people would do that to one another. Why would they do that? Because it is really, really hard to fight somebody without thumbs. It doesn't seem like a big deal. Oh, just thumbs, you know, what's the big deal? But when you have hurt your arm or your hand, my wife hurt her hand, you realize, oh man, I can't even use my thumb, and it's hard to do things. Hard to warm up a tortilla without a thumb. You know, you need that claw, you know what I mean? It's hard, like, what are you going to do? Like, trying to tie your shoes, yes. Trying to twirl the ends of your mustache. It's really, really hard without thumbs. And it's really hard to hold a sword. I'm not talking about that Nerf sword that you have in your closet still. Yeah. I'm talking about an actual sword. It's really hard to hold on to, grasp it without that lock on the other side. It's really hard to shoot a bow and arrow at somebody. So they would do that so that they couldn't hold a weapon properly and fight. They weren't a threat. What about the big toes? We go, big toes, like what's the deal? Big toes, believe it or not, again, this is another thing, you go check this yourself. If you lose your big toes, you lose balance. It's the strangest thing. Some of you have been taking biology or science classes or what is it, biology? Human anatomy? Whatever it is, I don't know. I missed that day. Anyways, you've been studying, you lose your toes, you lose balance. So you can't run and chase after somebody and be a threat to them. So they would do this. It really was a form of torture or punishment. Why did they do it? Well, let's find out. Look what verse 7 says. We have this quote from Adonai-Bezek himself. He says, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off used to gather scraps under my table. As I have done, so God has repaid me. Bam, there you have Adonai-Zedek. We get a little glimpse into what these people were like. He had done this very thing to 70 different kings. Now let me ask you a question, and I forgot to ask this during the service prior to you guys. So you guys get some special info here. You know why? Because I like you better, okay? So let me ask you something. Where did those 70 kings come from that he cut off their thumbs and toes? Again, you go study Canaanite history. You're going to find that those tribes that were living in that land, they were not doing so peacefully. They were warring with one another. So my guess is that those 70 kings had come from 70 other city-states around him over time, probably not all at once, but over time. And he would take these kings and disable them by cutting off their toes and their thumbs. And then look what he says in verse 7. 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off used to gather scraps under my table. So he would take these kings, remove their thumbs and their toes so that they lose their balance, they couldn't walk, they couldn't fight, they couldn't fend for themselves. And then he would say, you want to eat? Come into the king's chambers here, into the king's dining room, and you can eat whatever falls on the floor like the dogs. Go ahead. And they would have to crawl around and pick up food with no thumbs. Imagine trying to eat a burrito with no thumbs. Watch out. And they would suffer that way. So this is what we're talking about here when a moment ago when we read about 10,000 men of Bezek were killed, and we go, whoa, no, God, he's so bloody. That's so sad. Why would he do that? He's so mean. No. It's people like Adonai-Bezek that he is eliminating. He's taken out of the picture. And so it says at the end of verse 7, oh, did you notice what he said? Adonai-Bezek knew. He says, as I have done, so God has repaid me. You know what that's called? It's called vengeance. God had taken vengeance for all of those other kings, those other pagan kings. God had repaid him. This is called sowing and reaping. You plant something, whatever you plant comes up. You're going to plant some corn this year in your garden, corn's going to come up. Right? You're not going to plant a kernel and get a pumpkin from it. That's not how that works. You're going to plant a pumpkin, you're not going to get a corn. Whatever you plant, that's what comes up. He had been planting 70 kings. He had done it. Well, now it grew, and he experienced the same thing. Now, in verse 8, it tells us, I'm sorry. At the end of verse 7, then they brought him to Jerusalem, and there he died. Now, verse 8, I believe, not a big deal here, but I just want to make note of it in case somebody ever asks you, because it was a little bit confusing to me at first. But verse 8, I believe, is a quick parenthesis telling us what happened prior. Because he's just mentioned in verse 7 that they brought the king to Jerusalem, and then he ended up dying there. And then in verse 8 it tells us, now the children of Judah fought against Jerusalem and took it. They struck it with the edge of the sword and set the city on fire. So I believe that happened prior to this. They already had control of Jerusalem. They attacked Adonai-Bezek. They bring him to Jerusalem. He ends up dying there. Back in Joshua chapter 10, we're not going to turn there, but back in Joshua chapter 10, we read that Joshua defeated the ruler of Jerusalem at that time. Adonai-Zedek, I believe was his name, if I have that correct. But they defeated the ruler of Jerusalem. It doesn't say that they went to Jerusalem. Jerusalem, they met at another place and fought them. But it's very possible that once they defeated that king, that they went and took over his city. But at some point, I think they already had control of Jerusalem. Then here in our text in verse 7, they brought him to Jerusalem because they already had control over it, okay? But anyhow, it happened. They had control of Jerusalem. Now, verse 9 says, and afterward, the children of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites, who dwelt in the mountains in the south and in the lowland. So there's that name being used generically, Canaanites. These were different people groups, but they just say, oh, they're the Canaanites. Now, in verse 10 down to verse 15, we have what I believe to be a retelling of a story that we learned back in Joshua 15. And I believe that this story happens, my opinion, that it originally happened in Joshua 15. I say that because some Bible teachers believe that it actually happened here for the first time in Judges 1. But I'm of the opinion that it happened prior to this. But regardless, it happened. When it happened is not that important. Okay? But those of you who were not here for our Joshua study, you get a little taste here of what we went through in Joshua. I like the story a lot. Verse 10 says this: Then Judah went against the Canaanites who dwelt in Hebron. Now the name of Hebron was formerly Kirjath Arba, house of the books, and they killed Sheshai, Ahiman, which always reminds me of ahi tuna, which always reminds me of sushi. Anybody hungry? Okay, let's move on. Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. Okay, so they killed these three individuals. Who are they? Good question. We'll find out as we keep reading. Verse 11. From there they went against the inhabitants of Debir, who were Demir. No, I'm just kidding. The name of Debir was formerly Kirjath Sefer. Then Caleb Chirez said, I'm just kidding, it wasn't Caleb Chirez. Caleb Chirez is in here. He couldn't have been out there. Then Caleb said, whoever attacks Kirjath Sefer and takes it, to him I will give my daughter Aksah as wife. Now, some of you ladies might be like, oh, no, he didn't, and you start wagging your finger and the head starts getting all wobbly, like, I know he didn't give his daughter away. This is so wrong. Hold on. We'll talk about it, okay? We'll talk about it. Let's just read the story. Then Caleb said, whoever attacks, in verse 12, whoever attacks Kirjath Sefer and takes it, to him I will give my daughter Aksah as wife. And Othniel, if you were upset about verse 12, hold on. You're about to be even more upset. Verse 13. And Othniel, the son, now follow along. Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. So Caleb had a younger brother named Kenaz. Kenaz's son, Othniel. Okay, you with me? You got Caleb and Kenaz are brothers. Kenaz has a son named Othniel. Caleb has a daughter named Aksah. Caleb and Kenaz are brothers. That means that their kids are, thank you very much, cousins. Verse 13, and Othniel the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it. So he gave him his daughter Aksah as wife. Everybody okay with that? We'll just move on. Okay, let's. No way. Wait, what? Cousins? What? That's crazy. I thought that only happened in the South a long time ago. Like, what are you talking about? Listen. There are things, understand this, that we are reading a what? We're not reading something that was written last week. We're reading an ancient document. We're talking about another society, almost another world. You know what I mean by that. It's not literally another world, but it's like, it's another society, another community, another way of doing things and thinking. Now, you might think this whole thing is weird, like this man is giving away his daughter to her cousin. And you might go, man, that is the weirdest thing I've ever heard of. They're so backwards and backwoods. I just can't even, what is this all about? Well, I may be wrong. But I think that if we were to get Caleb or Aksah or Othniel or Kenaz, and if we were to somehow transport them into the future, 2025, they might think it was weird that people today pick a wife off of an app or find a husband by swipe right. They might think that was, I think it's strange, but that's just me. I'm old school. They might think it was strange. They might think it was strange that you found yourself a husband in Morocco and that now you got a 90-day fiance. They might think that was strange. So we think that they're strange for doing that. They probably would look at us like, you did what? Like, you married a complete stranger? Somebody who doesn't even belong or know your family? Like, what? Keep in mind, we're talking about a different society, different people, different land, different. This is the way that they did things. Now, it's told us in verse 13 that this young guy Othniel, that he did it. He took over the city of Kirjath Sepher. Now I want to propose to you that Caleb. We might think, well, Caleb, I mean, what a terrible dad, giving away his daughter. But I want you to understand, what did Caleb say in verse 12? Then Caleb said, whoever attacks Kirjath Sepher. So whoever that is needs to be either courageous or crazy, or maybe both. But I would say more so courageous. Whoever's going to go attack it, it's got to be courageous. And then whoever attacks it and takes it. So not only does the individual that's going to marry his daughter need to be courageous, but that individual also needs to be wise to know how to conduct warfare and needs to be successful. So this guy Caleb, and not that I've done this with my daughters, and I'm not planning to do this with my daughters, but I don't think he's so dumb. I think that when he put this out there, he's like, look, I want my daughter to marry somebody courageous, maybe a little bit crazy, but courageous, filled with faith, successful. That's what I want for my daughter. And so those are the guidelines that he puts out there. So this dude Othniel steps up to the plate like, oh man, I've seen Aksa. I'm your man. Here I come. And he takes charge and he's successful. Now, I love how the rest of the story goes, verses 14 and 15. Look at verse 14. Verse 13. So, he did. Caleb's younger brother took it, so he gave him his daughter Aksa, his wife. Now, verse 14. Now it happened when she came to Othniel, her new husband, she didn't waste any time, that she urged him to ask her father for a field. She gets there and she's immediately like, hey, we're going to get married. You need to go do this. I mean, this is classic husband and wife stuff, man. Othniel's probably like, yeah, I just conquered a city, and you know what? I got this new wife, man, and I'm just starting this new life, and where's my throne? Where's my, he's ready to just hang out, and Aksa is like, oh, hold on, we need some land, and you need to go talk to my dad and get some land. It's classic. Now, it is assumed that in fact he did that. Okay, he did that because here's what happens. In verse 14, now it happened when she came to him that she urged him to ask her father for a field. And now we're missing, if you go back to Joshua 15, you'll get some more little details in there. And she dismounted from her donkey, and Caleb said to her, what do you wish? So she shows up to talk to dad. She gets off of her donkey, and Caleb, listen, you go back and learn about Caleb. Caleb was an old man. Caleb was a leader. Caleb was a godly man. He was also a stone cold killer. I mean, a soldier, straight up. But his daughter comes, gets off of her donkey, and he's like, hey, what do you need? Tell me what you need. He's ready, man. Like, he's got his wallet open already here. Verse 14, what do you wish? You name it. It's yours. That's what's going on there in verse 14. I love that. Whatever you need. I've always told my kids, I've got 4 kids they're older now, but I've always told them, look, I will help you with anything. You get yourself in trouble and you get arrested, I'm going to be angry? Yes, you're going to get yelled at. Yes. But I'll help you to the best of my ability. You get a bad grade, you get something going on with your coach, with your teacher, with whoever. I'm here to help. I see Caleb doing this. He's like, hey, what do you wish? Verse 15, so she said to him, give me a blessing. See, I'm kind of like, I'm one of those dads too. I'm like, give you a blessing. I already gave you some land. I got you a husband. I gave you some land. She's like, hey, I'm asking for she's asking for everything. She got a husband out of the deal. She got some land because in verse 15, give me a blessing. She says to him, since you have given me land in the south, give me also springs of water. Right? Some of you ladies are like this with your dad. Dad, you gave me a car, but you didn't even get the windows tinted. Tint the windows. Oh, yes. So your dad might be a construction guy. He might be, ex-gang member. He might be tough. He doesn't take no trash from nobody. But his daughter comes to him, and he's like a little baby. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Okay, yes. Here, let me help you out. Dad, you got us this house. You gave me my own room, but, man, you didn't even get me a TV. Oh, okay, sorry, sweetie. Let me get you a TV. And some of you young ladies are like that. You know how your dad is. And he just folds under I was going to say folds under the pressure. There's not even any pressure. You look at him like, Dad, right, fine, all right, here's the card. Go buy what you need. Well, it seems to me that this young lady, Aksa, she seems like she's like her dad. Like her dad was like, give me the mountain, I'll go kill the giants, let's go. Aksa, in her own way, she's not going out and killing giants, but she's going out and killing her dad. Killing him softly. Like, hey, you gave me land, but you didn't give me no water. So what did he do in verse 15? And Caleb gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. Like, here you go. You have all the water you want. Blesses his daughter. Hooked her up with a husband. Hooked her up with property. Hooked her up with what she needed for her land. It's a wonderful picture. Now, in verse 16, we continue with our story in Judges chapter 16. 11:30. Okay, we've got to get you guys out of here pretty quick. Now, the children of the Kenite. Who's that? Moses' father-in-law. Anybody remember Moses' father-in-law's name? Started with a J and Jethro. Thank you very much. Jethro. Now, Jethro is no longer around. Moses is no longer around. We're talking about Jethro's family, his offspring. It says that they went up from the city of Palms. That's called Palm Springs. So just kidding, they weren't in Palm Springs. This is believed to be Jericho, okay? Went up from the city of Palms with the children of Judah into the wilderness of Judah, which lies in the south near Arad. And they went and dwelt among the people. Now, I got to say that the Kenites, this family, are not dumb. They said Judah was chosen by God to lead the way. Judah just killed 10,000 people. Judah is on a roll. Let's go with Judah. And they go with Judah, the Kenites. Verse 17, and Judah went with his brother Simeon, and they attacked the Canaanites who inhabited Zephath and utterly destroyed it. So the name of the city was called Hormah. Also in verse 18, Judah took Gaza. Whoa, I've heard of that before, right? Judah took Gaza with its territory, Ashkelon with its territory, and Ekron with its territory. Kind of crazy to think how long that land has been plagued by war. But keep in mind, not that it makes it right, but the entire world has been plagued with war. It's crazy. It's not good, but that's what happens. You get all these people, and everybody wants land and all these different things. But here, this is God orchestrating all of this. So in verse 19, so the Lord was with Judah. Now keep that in mind. They drove out the mountaineers. But, the word but is a word that connects two different things. When you hear the word but, you were going in one direction, then you hear the word but, and you switch directions. Judah, we were going good, man. We were going well. We started out really well. Then the word but is inserted. That means there's a change of direction. We're no longer going in a good direction. We've just switched to verse 19. But they could not drive out the inhabitants of the lowland because they had chariots of iron. Now let me ask you a question. If the Lord was with Judah, was God not able to overpower the chariots of iron? Is that the problem? No. The problem was the people. For some reason, at this point, their faith is diminished. They lose faith. They're obedient. They're trusting God. Wild things are happening. And for some reason, something happened, and they let go of their faith. Probably, in my opinion, they saw the chariots of iron and said, oh, man, look at that. We can't do that. That's what happens to us often. If you play sports, if you're an athlete, when you show up to a game or a match and you look at the other team, you're going to play volleyball, and then you're like, oh, man, these are like professional basketball players on this volleyball team. What happens in your heart? You give up. Oh, man, I'm done. You play soccer, you play sports, oh, man. But maybe you're not an athlete. You're a student, and that's your education. And then you're like, man, I studied, I'm ready for this test or this final. And then you show up and you're like, how many pages are here? Like, what? Like, something happens in your mind and in your heart. You make a decision. Oh, there's no way. I can't do it. Instead of continuing on by faith, we give it up. We lose heart. Something just changed. Verse 20 says, and they gave Hebron to Caleb as Moses had said. Then he expelled from there the 3 sons of Anak. Who were the 3 sons of Anak? I'm glad that you asked. Remember the 3 guys we mentioned earlier? Talmai, Ahituna, and Shammai? Those are the 3 guys. So it's just retelling us here. Now, you're looking at your chapter like, man, we got a lot of ground to cover from verses 21 to 36. Well, that's because I planned not to read all of those verses. Okay? Something changed. And I'm going to show you what just happened here, or the direction, I should say, that we're heading in now. Beginning at verse 21 down to verse 36 is called compromise. So your 2 main divisions are continuing by faith and then compromise. Now, I do not have any subpoints under this compromise section. You'll see why. You'll see why. I'm going to move through these quickly. Verse 21 says Benjamin. When the names Benjamin, Joseph, Manasseh, those are all tribes, groups of people. Benjamin did not drive out. So they didn't drive out the Jebusites. They were supposed to, but didn't. Now, verses 22 down to verse 26, you have the story of the house of Joseph. They did pretty good, but that's just a little glimpse. Verse 27 says Manasseh did not drive out. Verse 28 says that they put the Canaanites under tribute. In other words, they made them servants, but that was not the plan. God said, get them all out, not make them servants. They compromised. Verse 29, Ephraim, nor did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites. Verse 30, nor did Zebulun drive out the inhabitants. Verse 31, nor did Asher drive out the inhabitants. Verse 33, nor did Naphtali drive out the inhabitants. Verse 34, and the Amorites forced the children of Dan into the mountains, for they would not allow them to come down to the valley. What happened? What happened was these individuals, they started well, but didn't finish well. Why didn't they finish well? They didn't finish well because they didn't continue by faith. They didn't continue by faith. They started out well, but at some point along the way, they lost sight and they went, oh no, we can't do that. We can't do that. So it is important for you and I that you and I continue by faith. Let me put 4 things up on the screen that we're going to finish with here. Number 1, each of us has the opportunity to seek the Lord with or without a leader. That's what we saw at the beginning of our chapter. We saw people without a leader, and they said, hey, we don't have a leader. What are we going to do? Let's seek the Lord. Each of us has the opportunity. Why do I say opportunity? Because it was the people, they, instead of going, hey, where's Moses or where's Joshua? Let that person seek the Lord. They said, let's seek the Lord. And then they got the answer from God themselves. You have that same opportunity to say, you know what? I don't have to wait for the leader. Let me just pray on my own and let me pray to God, and then God will answer you. Instead of, oh, let the leader do it, then the leader can get the answer, and then the leader can come back and tell me. you can go to God directly. And I would even say beyond opportunity, you have the responsibility to do that. And once again, if you have a leader that's not seeking the Lord, then it's time to seek a new leader. Find somebody else to follow. Secondly, if God calls you to obedience, be obedient. That was Judah, the tribe of Judah. God called them to lead, so they led. They didn't finish well. We'll be reading about that for the rest of the book of Judges. But if God calls you to be obedient, to obedience, be obedient alone if necessary. Now, it's my opinion, I like that they asked Simeon, come with us, let's fight together. I love that. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, you see there the beauty of the church, God's people working together. Be obedient to the Lord, even if you have to do it alone. Thirdly, from one of the lessons that we learned here, if you can serve with another Christian, do it. Partner up with another Christian. Always good. Remember what Jesus said in Matthew 18:20, for where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst of them. So we have that wonderful promise that if you gather up with some other Christians, Jesus says, there I am in the midst. I'm there with you. Now, does that mean that he won't be with you if there aren't other Christians? No, it doesn't mean that. He certainly will be with you. But we have that beautiful promise, gather up with some other Christians. Serve together, live together, love together. And Jesus says, I'll be there in the midst, man. I'll be there. Wonderful promise. So whenever you can, find another Christian. Serve together. Got another Christian on your team or in your class or in your club? Partner up with them and say, hey, let's serve the Lord together here. It's a good thing. And then fourthly and finally, we always and only proceed by faith. You and I need to look at the example of Judah and the rest of those tribes and say, okay, wait a minute. They did not continue by faith. They thus failed. We need to continue by faith. We need to proceed by faith. But I also want you to understand this. The only way for us to proceed and even succeed is by faith. If you are proceeding or succeeding not by faith, I got news for you. You are not really proceeding. You think you are. You may be proceeding in life and reaching those, the higher echelons of business or, success, or, you got the number 1 spot on the team, or in the class, you got the highest grade, or, whatever you got, colleges, coming to you, please come to our college. But if you're doing that without the Lord and you think you're progressing, I got news for you. You're not progressing. If you're not doing it by faith, if you're not including the Lord, what did they do? They asked the Lord, hey, who do you want to lead? And then we're told throughout the chapter that God was with them. That's what we want. Even if we are not successful according to the world's standards, we want to be obedient. For the Christian, obedience to the Lord is success. Regardless of what my outward circumstances are, or my financial, my business portfolio or whatever, obedience to the Lord. So if we're not proceeding by faith, then we're not proceeding. In Hebrews chapter 11, it's called the Hall of Faith. In Hebrews chapter 11, you have all of these different short stories, these little glimpses of people throughout the Bible that lived by faith and were successful because they did so. You go through and you read it. Not all of them were successful according to the world's standards. Some of them, we're told, were sawn in half. You go, I don't want to be sawn in half. I know. But when it comes to faith, they stayed faithful to the end, not like Judah, not like these tribes. They stayed faithful to the end. And because of that, they were successful in the Lord's eyes. So you've got a choice. Do I want to be successful temporarily here on earth, or do I want to be considered successful by the Lord for eternity? I've got to make that decision. Now, oftentimes you can do both. You can be successful here and obedient to the Lord. There's a way to do that. But these guys are not doing it. The goal for you and I is to learn from their example what not to do, and let's continue by faith. So, Father, we thank you so much for today.